I tell people I made more money than my dad made in his lifetime while I was in my 20s. But what I don't tell you is the background behind it. My dad was born in 1905. Teddy Roosevelt was president. My mother was born a month after the Titanic sank in 1912. She had me very, very late in life. And she was his nurse. And unfortunately, my dad passed on Christmas Day when I was 6. My mom walked in and said, "You're the man of the house." And 2 days later, she's the breadwinner. So it's not about coming from privilege.
Every heart will sing, hard as all across the land we raise our voices far and near.
Bill McIntosh Show now on with Stacy Notley of the Manning Group. In case you're wondering who he is, I'll tell you all about it. This man is, he's a little bit like the boy named Sue. They named him Stacy, but he's 6'6". He's a black belt in Taekwondo. Is that Stacy?
That's correct. I'm
So
also 270.
You don't want to mess with him. I think it might turn out badly. And so anyway, he and I want to talk about the American dream. And, you know, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, came out and said, hey, it's physically impossible to pick yourself up by bootstraps, you know.
Ms. Hutchinson, I also want to thank you about bringing up the poverty draft and this idea of a bootstrap. You know, this idea and this metaphor of a bootstrap started off as a joke because it's a physical impossibility to lift yourself up by a bootstrap, by your shoelaces. It's physically impossible. The whole thing is a joke.
But it's an interesting concept in the American dream and in achieving success, the idea of bootstrapping. And Stacy has some very, very, let's say lots to say about that topic, about the American dream, about prosperity. Texas is the emblem of American can-do and American success. It really is in so many ways. Not to put down New York or California or, Arkansas or Illinois or others, Louisiana, Florida. But there's a lot of special things about Texas. It's a great state with a big heart and a great attitude. And of course, Texas didn't become Texas without Louisiana and people from other parts of the country coming to Texas and from Mexico, of course, to make it great. So, hey, welcome to the show, Stacy. How are you today? How's everything in Houston? Or no, Dallas, I'm sorry. My apologies.
Ouch. Yeah, there may not be a rivalry among the states, but there certainly is between Dallas and Houston. But yes, I'm
absolutely, man.
And
yes. And the thing about this is that keep in mind, folks, opportunity is what has made America great. Just prior to us starting this, Stacy was telling me about something important about being able to be a millionaire, and it has to do with this one trait or historical fact in your life. If you're working when you're 11 or 12, hey, you're headed in the right direction, as well as having lists and priorities. So tell us about this whole issue of poverty and how people make it or how people don't make it, and why this is quintessentially American, and why it's important to always count on credit, because Stacy works in a company that deals with credit issues. In case you have let's say a concern about a mortgage, or you've had catastrophic illnesses. Let me tell you something. Having a child that's sick, or a member of the family who's been sick, your wife, your spouse, oh my gosh, that can ruin your credit. There are ways you can fix it. Not that we're going to talk that much about that, but may that be in the back of your mind about Stacy Notley, Stacy C Notley. Because it's all about the American dream.
What you alluded to before with AOC, those are some interesting comments, because working your way up to your bootstraps, if I remember correctly, before she was in Congress, she was a bartender. And so going from tips to a couple of $100,000 a year is quite an accomplishment, whether you believe in her politics or not. I'm truly impressed with her ascension.
Sure, absolutely. And so let me ask you this question.
Sure.
Well, how is it that people, looking at the whole issue, not so much of finances, but character, virtue, how is it that people and you've seen this happen with many, many people you've known. How is it that people rise from humble circumstances to become, very successful people?
Well, you made the comment about working before the age of 11 or 12, and I want to add to that. It's working before the age of 11 or 12 and earning money, whether it was babysitting. I think you said you were a caddy, mowing yards, raking leaves, doing something to earn money and learning the value of it. But when we were kids, because I know we're contemporaries, you had a banking relationship. Your banker would say, well, I know Bill, I know his family. Go pick out a car for high school. We'll do the paperwork later. And now you don't have that relationship. My kids think a banking relationship is knowing where an ATM is. It's a different time.
Wow, that's something. Yeah, sure is. And it used to be that many parts of our country, and this is in the Midwest, the West especially, was a place where you didn't do a contract, you shook hands.
You do. You do. Well, and we had banking relationships. I tease my kids all the time that, again, when you and I were little, timeout was when mom's belt arm got sore. We didn't have timeout. A remote control was the youngest kid in the room that'd say, Bill, change the channel. Or did they call you Billy? And
right.
There were two answers. It was yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, ma'am, or yes, sir, no, sir. Nobody rubbed their shoulders and said, well, Bill, tell me, how did that make you feel? You were told to sit down and shut up, or, sit down at least.
Right.
And, you weren't part of the conversation. But now for banking relationship, and I'm a former banker, it was press 1 for English, 2 for Spanish. And if you want to talk to me, send me an email. You don't have a banking relationship like we used to. Or as my banker says, if you don't know your banker's name, you don't have one.
Right. So how do you, what's your reaction to this whole topic of equity, racial equity? I didn't have what rich guys had, or I came from, because of the color of my skin. I need the government to step in and to step up so I can get where
Bill,
people have white privilege.
I know you tell great stories, and I have one of those too, that I tell people I made more money than my dad made in his lifetime while I was in my 20s. But what I don't tell you is the background behind it. My dad was born in 1905. Teddy Roosevelt was president. My mother was born a month after the Titanic sank in 1912. She had me very, very late in life. And she was his nurse. And unfortunately, my dad passed on Christmas Day when I was 6. My mom walked in and said, you're the man of the house. And 2 days later, she's the breadwinner. So it's not about coming from privilege.
Right. So let me ask you a question. You've known a lot of really, really successful people in Texas and other places. You've been a speechwriter. You wrote speeches for President Bush, for John Tower, right?
Yeah. John Tower was my first.
Right. Tell me about the story of you doing the intro speech for John Tower.
Oh my gosh. Back when I was an undergrad at Austin College, Sherman, Texas, the oldest school in Texas under its original charter, I was in politics. I was a sophomore, and I was asked to introduce John Tower, who was a senior senator from Texas. And Tower was a great, great man, and he ascended. He was the first Republican elected statewide when LBJ, and since the Civil War, when LBJ went off to become vice president. And he walked around the state shaking hands and saying, Bill, I'd like to be your next senator. And he didn't tell if he was a Republican or not. He just told what he believed in. Well, he came to Austin College, and they wanted to have a student introduce him. And I was a pretty good choice because I was head of the young Republicans, or college Republicans. I was an RA, resident assistant in my dorm, and I played basketball, and I was in student government. And I said, I'd like to, but his executive director said, we need to know for sure. And I said, well, I'm really not dressed for it. Bill, I'm in jeans and probably a button down. And but I thought about it, and there was a girl named Julie I really wanted to impress. She was the best looking sophomore in the school, and Tower shows up, and then I was concerned, and the executive director handed me a little portfolio. In fact, I've got one right here. And he said, don't worry, I wrote your speech, and I wrote big. And so he hands me a little binder, and I'm repeating to myself, I can do this, I can do this. And the audience has probably hundreds of people in there, cameras. I walk up to the podium, and I find Julie. I make eye contact and smile. I open the binder, and it has 2 words, Bill. It says, wing it. Oh my gosh, the sweat, the profuse. I'm sure I turned bright red, and I knew brevity was a virtue. So I turned around And I said, ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable John Goodwin Tower, somebody we can all look up to. And everybody started to laugh because I've never met Tower. Tower at best is 5'4" in boots. He walked up to the podium. He grabbed my hand and pulled me down because I'm 6'6", but I wasn't near 270 back then. I was probably pressing 190, maybe 200 pounds. And he pulls me down and goes, "Nice one, kid." And as I shared with you yesterday, I was convinced my political career was over. After the speech had ended and he spoke and stepped down, signed a few autographs, said hi. His executive director, Bob Estrada, said, "The senator would like to see you." And I'm thinking, he's going to have me killed. Told me it was the best introduction he'd ever gotten. He offered me a scotch and if I'd like to write a few speeches when he goes to speak at college campuses, because it was the best reception he'd ever received on a college campus. So I wasn't killed. I did
Fantastic.
like acquire a taste for scotch, and I have fond memories of Senator Tower.
Great.
It didn't work out, unfortunately.
Yeah, and there's a lot of lessons to this, because let's face it. I mean, you learn by having to adapt to the difficult circumstances. It's not easy, right? I mean, honest to goodness, they thrust you into the situation. You're at the deep end of the pool. You feel like you're looking stupid as heck, and then all of a sudden, you thought, I really messed up big time, and it opened up the doors of opportunity for you, because
it did. And at the same time, at 19, you think you know everything, and then you realize you don't.
But you told me a really good story. I love this story, man. You told me a story about a guy who said to a bunch of people, I have an idea, I want to do partnerships with you, and I want to make you, and he said this to everybody, I want to make you a millionaire. Tell us that story, Stacy.
Well, there was a mayor in Dallas that went around shaking hands a lot like John Tower. And he said, "I'd like to work with you. For example, I'd like to work with you, Bill. What's your specialty?" And you say, "Hey, I'm in real estate, I'm in oil and gas, or whatever else." And he would support you. I'm in a networking group called BNI, Business Networking International. And we call it Giver's Gain. By helping someone else accomplish their goals, they'll often reciprocate and in turn help you even more. And that's what he did. He walked around and he made a lot of contacts, a lot of good people, brought them in some cases to his company, or in other cases, they stayed in their own company and were able to build an empire. Nobody cares. Somebody who starts out with millions in the bank, or a family, nobody cares about that story, but we all love the Rocky story. How, like you said, you pull yourself up, or, from rags to riches. And I heard Eddie Childs, who brought the Texas Rangers, the baseball team. They were the Washington Senators, but Eddie Childs brought them to Texas. They became the Texas Rangers, our baseball team. And he was talking one day and he said, I've been rich and I've been broke, and rich is better. And you don't appreciate it until you've lost everything. And a lot of the richest people in the world have at one time been broke or filed bankruptcy. I told you this was not my chosen career path, Bill. I planned on going to law school. But as I shared, my mother had me very late in life, and she was in her 70s when I was in college and got Alzheimer's. So I knew I could go through business school, but I wasn't sure I could complete or do a good job at law school. So I went through business school. I got into real estate and did fairly well in my 20s, and was on the board of two small banks, Medallion National Bank, Premier National Bank. And then all of a sudden we invested in land with a bunch of guys smarter than me. And unfortunately, we did it up and down a road called the North Dallas Toll Road, and we bought land either side, thinking that when the toll road's finished, Bill, we're going to triple, quadruple our money, would be set for life. Well, what happened is they said it was going to take 4 years longer to build, and so land that was worth 2 and 3 and 4 million got revalued at 2 and 3 and 400,000. I lost my shirt, so the month I turned 30-something, I got married and filed bankruptcy for over $5 million, and I'd never even made a late payment in my life. And so I'm very appreciative.
Stunning.
Well, back in the 90s, we would tease you could write a check in Texas and your bank would bounce. But fortunately, it would come back around. And, did you ever have...
Let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
1 second. This is interesting.
Yeah.
So they had this ambition, you and a bunch of investors. You bought these land parcels straddling a road that was being made into a toll road because there was going to be a tremendous growth. So it went bust. You went bankrupt. You reestablished yourself. Tell us about remaking it. How did you, you're successful now. I mean, how did you How did you bounce back from that tremendous setback?
Well, one day at a time. One of the things that'll happen is we say around here, the problem is never the problem. How you deal with it is. You ever have one of those teachers in college, Bill, or high school that talked about the real world but hadn't been outside the classroom in 20 years? They probably don't know about the real world. Or somebody who's never done radio and said, well, how hard is it to talk for an hour? And and in your case, be entertaining.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Take this away from every day-to-day issues of being able to make ends meet and all that, which is important. And that's our daily reality. People oftentimes find themselves kind of like a beached whale. They've lost their jobs. They want to start over. What's your advice for somebody who needs to start over right now? And they look at the situation, they look at how divided our country is. Where's the opportunity in our country right now, Stacy? Let's say you had carte blanche to start over again. Instead of being somebody born in the 50s like me, you were born in, let's say, you were born in the 90s, the 80s or the 90s. And you're starting out. Where would you go? What would you do?
I'd get a mentor. I'd get a coach. Some of the greatest athletes in the world, Tiger Woods, he has a coach. He has a hitting coach. Michael Jordan had a coach. Warren Buffett started out with coaches. Get somebody smarter than you to work with. I had the privilege of working with a Harvard professor when I was at SMU, and I learned a lot. Ask questions. My mother used to say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and use your ears.
If somebody were to say, hey man, there's discrimination, I can't get a mortgage, I'm black, or I'm a person of color, I'm brown, true or false?
False. That again, you pull a credit report. When you pull a credit report, it's based on your Social Security. They pull it up and they see how well you've paid things over time. And if you've paid well, there's no reason, and you have an income. You can have great scores, but if you're unemployed, you're not going to get a loan. And you can have poor scores and a lot of money in the bank, and you can get a loan. So, the answer changes, but someone not getting a mortgage, it could be, white, black, Hispanic, young, old, married, widowed, single, divorced. It's anybody that can afford it, will be able to get a home somewhere or other.
Right. So they're not going to say, oh, wait a second. Oh, he lives on the other side of the tracks, man. He's got a bad zip code. Is that real?
In my opinion, no, sir. That I grew up without a dad. I grew up with a single mom. I got to tell you that we had lots of challenges. I started mowing yards at 11 and 12, and so I started making money to help my mom out, and she was then in her 50s and 60s, and so there's nothing that we had a privilege. Again, I think I shared with you that all of my aunts and uncles were born in the 1890s. I was literally raised by grandparents. They never had a credit card. It was like you described, a handshake, and that's how they did business.
Right. They were born when the word gay meant happy, cheerful.
Yeah. And it was a different time. And what you and I knew as punishment, oh my gosh, my daughter at 12, I took her cell phone away, Bill, and she looked at me, Dad, that's child abuse. And I told her, I said, no, I know what child abuse is, and taking your cell phone away is not child abuse.
Yeah, sure. So tell me about young parents. They've got kids. They want them to be happy individuals when they're adults. They want them to be responsible individuals, contributing individuals, successful. So what's your advice for parents, about raising kids?
Well, my 3 kids have made me proud. One works at Parkland Hospital in Dallas in cybersecurity. My middle son is going off. In fact, he's in flight school right now. And that's a left turn from going off to med school, then law school. Now he's going to be a pilot. And my daughter aced the dental exam, so she's going to be going off and be a dentist. And, they've all done well, but they all have earned their way. That we made them do chores around the house. We made them responsible. We did discipline them growing up.
All right, good. So, Stacy, we've spoken about making it in America. And we look at the new juggernaut in the world economy. It's China. China is doing something about credit and credit scores. They came up with this concept called social credit scores, or that's what it's termed as. And in other words, so if they see you on social media being pro-democracy or not going along with something about COVID-19 or about a vaccine or something like that they've developed in China, or because you were, helping out, following a website that is pro-democracy in Hong Kong, all of a sudden you find out that you got turned down for a business loan. Social credit scores are coming to America. Why? Well, we see people being deplatformed. In effect, we're seeing recently there was a case of General Michael Flynn, who worked under Trump, who had a Chase Manhattan bank card that got turned down. All of a sudden, out of the blue, he couldn't use it, and it got rejected. Then it was a huge uproar, and then they reinstated it and said, "Oh, we made a mistake."
The former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency and Trump National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn. Now, Michael Flynn has already been wronged. He already has been cleared of all of the stuff that they said. It was completely bogus what they said about Michael Flynn. Completely bogus. But he just got a account notice from Chase Bank over the weekend, and here's what it reads. After careful consideration, we decided to close your credit cards on September 18th, 2021, because, listen to this carefully, this is the Great Reset. Because continuing the relationship creates possible reputational risks to our company. Wait, because General Flynn might be charging a stay at the Holiday Inn Express, that somehow or another is going to risk their reputation of Chase Bank? Just let me remind you, JP Morgan Chase, the one that just wrote almost $1 billion check. Let me get this right. Almost wrote $1 billion check to resolve federal wire fraud charges because the company, in a separate criminal scheme, defrauded the precious metals and U.S. Treasury markets. That company is worried about doing business with Michael Flynn.
People don't buy the thing about mistakes anymore. They know what's happening. They see people being deplatformed, being threatened from access to capital, access to cash, because PayPal doesn't want them to be on the platform anymore, or maybe Patreon, which pays content providers or allows them to be compensated because their followers say, "I love what Stacy is saying. I want to go to his Patreon. I want to sign up for $10 a month to support him." You now see cases where people are starting to be content providers. Are starting to be persecuted. They're starting to be deplatformed. They're starting to be like Alex Jones. The bottom line is that he was deplatformed. Everybody got together and they said, Google, YouTube, Facebook, they kind of conspired together and they deplatformed him. We saw this with Parler. Parler was basically killed as a social platform, and it was doing great. And all of a sudden they got together and they just stabbed it in the back because they don't agree with their politics. We're seeing people being taken out and basically, destroyed as a brand, destroyed as a potent force in the economy with independent ideas. What would it mean? What would it mean today if everybody who went to a bank to get a credit card or to get a loan for a mortgage for a house or a business loan, what would happen if they took into account your activity online and your activity on Facebook and on Twitter, and the fact that you were conservative, you were pro-family, you didn't believe that children should choose their gender? What would it do to America right now if that was the standard operating procedure to get a loan?
Well, first and foremost, after hearing your description, I'm glad I live in the U.S. and not China, because on social media, it's kind of like the court system. I'm taking a little bit of privilege on this one. We don't have a justice system. We have a legal system. Sometimes both sides go to court and you're mad at the judge, you're mad at the jury, you're mad at the outcome. And, political views change. I know when I was a kid, I used to think, you should never use cash, use a credit card because you didn't have to pay it back. And now I know better. I use a credit card because I have the choice of using a credit card. Just having the opportunity to talk about freedom or the freedoms we have and the ability to use credit or use cash or use a debit card. I like the fact that we have our choice.
Tell me about something. You've met some really incredible people. You probably know a couple of billionaires in Texas, or multimillionaires that have hundreds of millions of dollars. Some of these people have different ideas, one way or the other, right?
Agree.
You have people like Mark Cuban, who's pretty left wing,
right?
And then you have other people like, I don't know, Ross Perot, may he rest in peace. He recently passed away. That have totally different ideas. I mean, what would have happened to a lot of these people if they were just shut down because of their beliefs? What would happen to their businesses? What do you think?
Well, fortunately, they weren't shut down, and they had the opportunity. Mark came up with an incredible idea that's earned in millions and then billions. And the others that are more conservative, I always think of just choice, Bill. That whether you're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, that we have a choice using credit, using cash. I hate the fact that sometimes we get judged by our social media presence or lack thereof. Because again, we talked about that growing up, we didn't talk about credit, and now it's getting towards the forefront. What's your credit rating? What's your credit score? And you are judged by it, even though the scores can be misleading. When I was in college, I was in the car with my Harvard professor, Dr. Tozer. We drove by this beautiful house, Bill, and I mean landscaped, acres, green grass, several stories, just a beautiful home. And I looked at him and said, God, I'd like to buy that house. And he looked at me and he said, that's the difference between a young man and an old man. He said, I'd like to have the money, then decide. And I've never forgotten that it was a matter of choice. And so whether you choose to be Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, I don't care what type of business you use. I don't care if you use credit or not, but I care that it's your choice. And fortunately, so far in America, we do have a choice.
Right, but that's quickly
changing.
That door is starting to close, because if they can take a general, and I think this was just like a test, if they can turn him down and get away with it, that's a signal to banks across the country to shut down people that the establishment doesn't like. For example, suppose you say, you know something, I don't like this COVID-19 vaccine, and you go online and you state that, because you maybe knew somebody that had a blood clot from it afterwards, and then to think, my gosh, that your bank account, finds out and they shut down your bank account. They say, you know something, we've decided we can no longer have you as a client. And so therefore, basically they totally not only deplatform you, they debank you.
Well, and let's talk about credit for just a second, because what you mentioned, again, we talked about justice system versus judicial. We have a legal system. And when it comes to credit, think about it this way. The credit bureaus will say, TransUnion, Equifax, Experian, the three major bureaus talk about that they treat everyone the same. And in theory, that sounds good, but when you're dealing with you and I, maybe we spend $100 or $200 a year buying our credit reports from the major bureaus, whereas you're dealing with JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, that are not billion-dollar banks, but they're trillion-dollar banks. If you lose a client like us that spends $200 a year, no big deal. If you lose a client like a major bank that spends $200 million a year, it's devastating. So there are things you need to find leverage and need to find ways to maintain and enhance and keep good credit, which is what we help people do.
Tell us about your book, Stacy.
Well, we help people maintain good scores because, unlike you and I had the privilege of knowing our bankers back in the 60s and 70s and somewhat in the 80s, you don't have that anymore. Credit Solutions is a step-by-step guide to establishing, enhancing, and maintaining good credit, because if you don't have a chance to meet your banker one-on-one, at least you have a chance through the book. It will show you how to maintain good credit and good credit scores, legally, ethically, morally, and most of the time quickly.
Right, sure. Support credit is vital to anybody's future, whether it's being nowadays getting a job, getting a loan, getting a mortgage, and opening the doors to success and the American dream. Well, Stacy, listen, it's great having you on the Bill McIntosh Show. Hope we can do it again. Godspeed to you. Folks, get Credit Solutions. It's a great book. It looks like a $100 bill. It's been jazzed up a little bit. It's available on Amazon.
Well, actually, it's available from us, and may I give you a toll-free number and an email?
Yes, positively. Yeah, what is your toll-free number, Stacy?
Toll-free number is 888-458-9100. That's 888-458-9100. And I'd love to hear from you or anyone else. In our email, my email is stacy@manning-group.com. And that's also our website, manning-group.com.
Awesome, Stacy. Thanks. Likewise, Stacy. Thanks so much for being on the show, and hope we can do it again.